Hello, thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, this is Ringo, and today we are talking about Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman, published in 1995, and I'm comparing it with the movie adaptation directed by Griffin Dunn, released in 1998. And we are, of course, still in subscriber month, and this was suggested by two people. So the first one, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but Jolie Itel is one of the people who suggested this, as well as someone whose username is TA1920. So thank you so much for suggesting this one. It has been on my radar for quite some time, and this just gave me the opportunity to finally cover it. And the reason I have Ringo joining me in today's video, you know, cats are what would be associated with a video about witches, but a rabbit is talked about in the book because one of the characters falls in love with a guy who is a magician, and he has a pet rabbit that is like a free roam bunny in his house. And so he does kind of relate, and it's, it really is just an excuse for me to show off my adorable bunny. And he's just so chill, right? Like, so many rabbits would have jumped out of my arms by now. But Ringo is just the best bunny ever, and he is so cuddly and so cute. And yeah, I just love him so much. I've had him in one video before, but that was a while ago. So yeah, and just look at his feet. Rabbit feet are just so big and fluffy and so cute. But yeah, this video is not going to be all about him, but I just like the opportunity to show him off because he's just so cute. But as relaxed as he is, I will not be holding him for this entire video, so I will go ahead and put him down, but he will make another appearance later on. And he has really pretty eyes too. I don't know if you can tell, but he has like gray eyes, which are really pretty. So yeah, just some rabbit footage for you because he's so cute. But anyway, Practical Magic is a chick flick about the Owens family. So we have two aunts who raise two sisters, Sally and Jillian. And then Sally has two daughters of her own, Antonia and Kylie. And so we see the ups and downs of their relationships with each other, as well as their romantic relationships. But the twist on this chick flick is that the Owens come from a long line of witches. And I'm just going to get right into the plot, which means we will have spoilers going forward. And the book and movie, it's one of those where they're similar in some ways, but they have enough differences that to talk about them together would be too confusing for me as well as for the viewer. So to make it less complicated, I'm going to talk about the book first and then move on to the movie plot. So beginning with the book, like I said, Sally and Jillian are raised by their two aunts who are witches. Their own parents died because they were so in love that when there was a fire in the house, they did not smell the smoke, and so they burned in this fire. And they had been on like some vacation, and so it was just the two of them. And so then the aunts did not want to be mothers, but if they don't raise Sally and Jillian will become wards of the state. So they reluctantly pick up the girls and end up raising them. And yeah, they are witches who focus specifically on matters of love to some extent in one way or another. And so the daughters are raised seeing various women in the town come to the aunts when they need assistance in, whatever kind of romantic love issue they're having. And even though a lot of women in the town do visit the aunts, for the most part, the town, like in broad daylight, they shun the Owen sisters because they are witches. And so Sally and Jillian just have like a horrible childhood where they are like bullied and picked on and teased. And when Jillian is 18, she runs away to go get married because she's like, I'm tired of this town, I'm starting fresh. And even though she gets married, she goes through men very quickly and does not stay with anyone for very long. Meanwhile, Sally, she ends up marrying a local man, and he moves in with her in the aunt's house, and the aunts love him. And because she marries this guy, the town now is more accepting of Sally and the Owens, and she begins to be invited to things. And when they have family events, he invites townspeople and they actually show up. And so Sally is like, wow, I'm like a normal person, finally. And they have two daughters. However, her husband does end up dying after like 5 years of marriage. And then from here, she goes into a depression for a year. And during this time, the aunts have to raise her daughters because she is so out of it. And Jillian will call her once a week, being like, you gotta get through this and pick yourself up and move on. And she tries to be encouraging to her. And after the year when Sally does come out of it, she decides that she is going to move towns because she is tired of this town she grew up in where she is made fun of and teased, and her daughters are being made fun of and called witches. And so she moves out of state. And from here, she doesn't have much of a relationship with her aunts, but her daughters love them, right? Because the aunts helped raise them for a year. And so even after Sally moves, she will still take her daughters to see the aunts once a year over the summer. And in this new town, Sally is able to start fresh, and she is seen as one of the most responsible responsible woman in the town, and she is very respected. And even though she doesn't really date very much and she doesn't remarry, she is still happy with the way she has been able to restart her life, essentially. And so many years pass, and when her daughters are now 16 and 13, Jillian shows up on her doorstep, and she has not seen Jillian in like 18 years or something. And Jillian tells her that her dead boyfriend is in the car, and the story is her boyfriend Jimmy had been an abusive alcoholic, but that when he was like mild-mannered, he was just an incredible person and she loved him. And so she had been microdosing him in order to keep him more even-tempered, but she fears that this microdosing must have slowly been killing him because they were driving and they stopped at a rest stop when he just slumped over and died. And she freaked out, didn't know what to do, and so she just showed up on Sally's doorstep, and Sally helps her bury Jimmy in the front yard, and then Jillian comes to stay with Sally and just kind of get a fresh start of her own. And Jillian has this habit of getting in toxic relationships. So yeah, she is now moving in with Sally, wanting to avoid dating and just kind of get herself sorted out. And while she is living with Sally and her daughters, we hear about the daughters' life and the drama going on with them as well, Antonia and Kylie. But Jillian shares a room with Kylie, and so the two of them become especially close. However, their closeness leads to a falling out between Jillian and Sally because Jillian convinces Kylie to dye her hair, and Sally is very upset about this. And so there is just starts to be a lot of animosity in the house after this event, and also different things happen where it's like someone rips up Jillian's checks, or like one of Sally's earrings are missing and found in Jillian's pocket. And so they just keep having more and more reasons to be angry with each other. And one morning they are arguing when Kylie, who kind of has a sixth sense ever since she was a baby, she's like, don't you guys know he likes it when you're angry at each other? Like you're just giving him what he wants when you don't get along. And turns out she's talking about Jimmy because she has been seeing Jimmy's ghost standing above where they buried him. And even though no one else sees him, Sally and Jillian know that she's talking about Jimmy because the way she is describing him and where she is pointing. And there are these lavender bushes that have been growing above his body. And so Sally goes out there and she cuts down all of the lavender, and then problem solved. And just cutting the lavender stops Kylie from seeing his ghost, and they're like, okay, it's all fine now, no need to worry anymore. However, the problem with Jimmy won't end because even after cutting down the lavender, from there, I think in the book, like rose bushes do end up growing. Rose bushes are in the movie, but it seems like after the lavender, there was like a bramble that turned into a rose bush in the book, if I remember correctly. Anyway, also parts of him are coming up from the ground, such as a ring he wore, which was a very distinct ring, as well as one of his boots suddenly is just in the garden. And so the sisters then decide that they need to call the aunts because they are witches and they will know what to do in order to keep Jimmy buried. And so the witches show up, and this is a big deal too because Jillian had not seen her aunts in like 18 years. And she didn't want to see them. And so seeing them again for the first time was a huge deal. And also Sally, isn't on the best of terms, but regardless, the aunts show up and they're there to help them. And they have this fun girls' night concocting a brew in order to keep Jimmy dead and buried. But backtracking, before the aunts show up to concoct this brew, there is an investigator named Gary who is on the hunt for Jimmy because in the book, Jimmy had given dangerous drugs to college kids, and this led to some of them dying. And so he is on the hunt for Jimmy. And thanks to a letter Sally had written to Jillian when Jillian was staying with Jimmy, he now has Sally's address. And he also falls in love with Sally through this letter. And so he's tracking down Jimmy, but he also just wants to meet Sally because he is so smitten with her based on how she came across in this letter. And so he goes to see them, and they lie, they make up different excuses, but he knows they're lying. And also he and Sally just have this instant vibe between each other. They both feel something going on between the two of them. And Sally hates lying to him. And so after he leaves, Sally, that very night, she chases him down at his hotel room, and she tells him the truth. And she's like, you said you're looking for Jimmy because you don't want him hurting anyone else? Well, you don't need to worry about it. He's not going to hurt anyone else because he's dead. My sister and I do not deserve to go to jail over this. So if you could just let sleeping dogs lie and we can all just move on. And so Gary takes this information and he goes back home. And later on, he sends Sally a letter that has a document showing that Jimmy, his body was found in a burned down house. And so basically Gary found a body that was burned beyond recognition. He puts Jimmy's very distinct ring on this dead corpse. And then now they have a corpse for Jimmy and people will no longer be looking for him, which gets Jillian and Sally off the hook. And then also while all of this is going on, Jillian is falling in love with this local guy who is a magician. the one with the bunny. And so, yeah, by the end of the story, everybody is in love and getting along and doing great. And Jimmy is not giving them any more problems. And now to move on to the movie. So the movie begins with Maria Owens, who is, one of the ancestors who was going to be executed for being a witch. And we hear that when she was pregnant, she's not executed, by the way, she's able to escape that. But then she falls in love with a guy and he gets her pregnant. And while she is pregnant, he abandons her. And so she is heartbroken and she vows to never fall in love again. However, this vow turns into a family curse where any Owens women, if they fall in love, it won't last. And this, Maria Owens is in the book, but in the book, Maria Owens, she gets pregnant and she has a baby. And even after the birth of this baby, she still sees the father and she is still in love with him. However, at some point he does drop her because he's tired of her. And despite her pleading, he's just like, no, it's over. And he is also married in the book. So he already has a wife. And so in the book, she is heartbroken about this, but I don't think she made any vow to not fall in love, and nothing she did translated into a family curse. So I think that is unique to the movie. I even went back and read parts of the book to see if I missed something because the curse was such a big deal in the movie. But in the book, I don't think there was any family curse. Actually, so in the book, even if a curse isn't directly talked about, I feel like it is implied though, because the aunts, they fall in love when they're young, but we hear that the guys they loved ended up dying when they were struck by lightning. And then of course you have Sally and Jillian's parents who both died. And then Sally, her husband dies. And then Jimmy dies, but also before Jimmy, she just couldn't get a relationship to last. So either those are a bunch of coincidences or it's kind of implying that they are cursed when it comes to love. I already talked about how Sally and Jillian's parents died in the book, which is that they were so in love with each other. Whereas in the movie, the husband dies because of the curse, because no love will last with the Owens sisters. And then the mom dies of a broken heart because of the death of her husband. And then in the movie, Sally, she falls in love with that local guy. However, in the movie, the aunts helped contributed by like having some kind of spell be placed on the two of them, which was not in the book. But yeah, in the movie, she falls in love with this local guy and they get married. And again, it's like they have a normal family finally, and they're accepted by the town. However, he ends up dying, and his death in the movie is attributed to this curse. And in the book, I said that after the death of her husband, she moves to a different state to start afresh. That is not the case in the movie. She stays in the same town as her aunts are in. She doesn't live with her aunts, but yeah, she's in the same town with them. And so she still has more of a relationship with them. And she does have two daughters in the movie as well, but we never see into the daughters' drama. And the daughters stay pretty young throughout the entire movie. One of which, by the way, is played by a young Evan Rachel Wood. But yeah, in the movie also, after the death of her husband, Jillian comes to see Sally, and she's there for like a night in order to help comfort Sally and, help lift her spirits. Whereas, like I said in the book, Jillian called once a week, but she didn't actually physically show up. And then, yeah, to move on to Jimmy in the movie. So Sally goes to see Jillian in order to rescue her because Jillian has called her up saying that, she needs to get away from this boyfriend of hers. And so when Sally shows up to get Jillian away, Jimmy kind of like takes them hostage in a way, and he makes Sally drive in his car and he's with Jillian in the back. And then partway through, he starts getting violent with Jillian. And so Sally is the one who ends up killing Jimmy. And so they're both freaking out because they have just committed murder. And they're like, you know what? Let's bring him back to life because we're witches and we can. And if he's alive, we can't be accused of murder. And so they take him back to their house and they bring him back to life. However, when he's brought back to life, he is still psychotic. And so Sally ends up killing him yet again, and then they bury him in the front yard. And so, as in the book, Jillian is now living with Sally and her daughters, and things are going relatively well. When one night the aunts come over and they're drinking margaritas and they're having a good old time, when suddenly the aunts start singing the song that had been playing on the radio when Jimmy died, and then they also realize that they are drinking the same type of alcohol that Jimmy had been drinking. So Sally and Jillian make eye contact and they're like, what is happening right now? And by the way, the significant song that is being sung is You Were Always on My Mind. And this movie has the Elvis version, but I can never hear this song again without thinking about All of Us Strangers, because it has such a significant scene in that movie as well. And All of Us Strangers, oh my gosh, that movie is just so incredible and so powerful and so emotional. emotional, and I will never be able to hear any version of Always on My Mind and not think of All of Us Strangers. And so yeah, just hearing it in this movie just made me think of that movie. But anyway, so yeah, the aunts leave soon after this, and then there is a rose bush that is growing above Jimmy's grave where they buried him. And so Sally is like cutting down the rose bushes in order to get rid of Jimmy's spirit. And while she is cutting down these rose bushes is when Gary shows up. So the same story with him looking for Jimmy. Although in the movie, Jimmy had like killed a woman. It wasn't the college kids and the drugs like it was in the book. But regardless, he shows up to ask about Jimmy, and the reason he knows Sally's address is because of the letter, the same thing. And also in the movie, he read this letter many, many times, and he kind of fell in love with Sally in a way. But in the movie, he's not quite as love struck as he had been in the book. But yeah, so he questions Sally and Jillian, and he knows they're lying. And so then he leaves. And from here, he questions the town about the Owens sisters and the Owens family. And everybody, of course, just has these ridiculous stories and superstitions and theories about them being witches. And then he later shows up to their house yet again during breakfast time to question them. And while he is there, they see a frog like burp up Jimmy's ring. And in the book, a frog does burp up his ring, but one of the daughters had seen it. Whereas in the movie, Gary is right there and he sees it and he knows that's Jimmy's ring. And so he's like, okay, like you guys better lawyer up because I know you're involved with this and you're lying. And he storms off. And from here, Sally chases after him and she basically confesses. But then from here, Sally then goes back home and Gary comes with her and they see that Jillian is possessed by Jimmy. And Gary is here and he sees this. And Gary is the one who is able to get rid of Jimmy's ghost. And after this, he basically tells Sally, like, don't worry about it. You guys won't be, held accountable for murder. Like, I'll figure this out. Don't worry about it. And then they also acknowledge like the romance between them, but how like it can't be though. And so he ends up going back home. And then when Sally returns to her home, Jillian is there and she sees that Jillian is yet again possessed by Jimmy and they didn't get rid of him permanently. And so she calls the aunts and then she calls different women in the town because the aunts are like, we need a lot of women to gather together to help us, exorcise Jimmy from Jillian. She still lives in her hometown and so she is ostracized, and yet she reaches out to a lot of these women who had judged her, but they all show up for her in this moment. And so they all show up and they get Jimmy out of Jillian and then they get him back in the ground and they have brewed a concoction in order to keep him buried and out of their lives. And then from here, we also get the document where Gary has like come up with a different way to show that Jimmy has died so that Jillian and Sally are off the hook. And then he also ends up returning to her because, they had fallen in love. And so once again, the movie ends happily ever after. And we even see them at Halloween time and the Owens sisters, Owens family has put on this witch show for the whole town to see. And so we see that they are accepted and loved by the town again and they are embracing their witch heritage. And yeah, there is no Ben. Ben is the name of the guy Jillian falls in love with. He is not in the movie, but we do see that Sally ends up with Gary. As far as like some general changes from book to movie, witchcraft played a much bigger role in the movie. And this was a really good choice on the movie's part because in the book, it's about witches and yet so little of it has to deal with them being witches. And I was kind of disappointed because I feel like when you pick up a chick flick about witches, you expect that to be a big element, and it just wasn't. And that was very disappointing. And there was just very little supernatural and, very little spells and just all of that did not play much of a role. But it was interesting because the book kind of makes a point to show how just falling in love can make people crazy and, being love struck and like under the spell of love and how that is its own kind of spell, and that's its own kind of magic. And so I did think that was an interesting spin on it, where rather than us getting some actual magic, instead we just hear about, the magic of falling in love. And then, yeah, we see a lot more of the aunt in the movie as well, because like I said, in the book, she lives in a different state and Sally and Jillian just they don't have a very close relationship with the aunts. But I loved that we saw more of them in the movie, and that margarita scene, the way it goes from like fun to chaotic and like unhinged to then being eerie. I thought that was really well done and I really loved it. And then also the sisters have like this telepathy connection kind of, and the part when they're in the car, Jillian is like telepathically telling Sally that there's poison like in the front seat somewhere and that she needs to poison Jimmy's alcohol. And that part, I just love the way that was filmed. I thought that was really cool. And then, yeah, we see a lot more of Antonia and Kylie in the book. Like the drama going on in their lives is a very big part of the story. And I was fine with the movie getting rid of that because I was more interested in Jillian and Sally. And so the stuff stuff with her daughters, I just didn't care about as much. And so I thought it was a good call for the movie to cut all of that. But also going back to the aunts, so seeing them again was a big deal for Jillian in the book. And there's a part where it says that the aunts have become less judgmental. And so when they finally do see Jillian, rather than being harsh, they're just very open and accepting. And in the book, it says that they have been watching a lot of Oprah, and so that they have learned to not be judgmental, essentially, which I thought was a funny detail. But then there is also a really interesting story in the book from when Jillian and Sally are girls. They see a woman come in to get help from the aunts because she wants this guy to fall in love with her, but he is already married. And so after he falls in love with her, she comes back being like, okay, I need him to leave his wife because he's not leaving his wife. And so then they cast a new spell to get him to leave his wife and marry her. And just we see how this ruins this woman's life essentially by getting what she wants. And so it makes a big impact on the daughters of like the dangers of love, right? And just that whole story I thought was really interesting in the book. And it was one of the few stories in the book that actually had to deal with witchcraft and spells, which, talking about witchcraft and spells, there is also in the movie, we see that Sally is like, I never want to fall in love because she sees how crazy it makes people. And so she casts the spell for the perfect man, but the way she cast the spell, like this man couldn't possibly exist in her mind. And so she's like, that's the point. I'm wishing for a man who doesn't exist, and that will ensure that I never fall in love. But of course, Gary ends up filling the criteria of this list. And yeah, to move on to book versus movie, like I enjoyed this book, but I felt like it almost was having an identity crisis at times because when we have stuff with Antonia and Kylie, it felt like a YA story. But then we would get these like jarring moments involving Sally or Jillian, actually probably more often Jillian, where it would be like suddenly not graphic, but it would suddenly be in very adult territory. And so you're just like, whoa, we went from talking about like a 13-year-old and her, 13-year-old problems to suddenly this like very adult situation with Jillian. I felt like it just wasn't very balanced. And even though I think it had a lot of potential to be really good, I feel like it just needed some reorganizing and like some rewrites to help it be more consistent, I think, too. And then also the fact that being witches kind of had very little to do with the story. And that was a huge disappointment. I'm pretty sure when people pick up the book, Practical Magic, they're wanting some witchy related content, and there just was not enough witches in the story. And so I loved that the movie won. Like I said, I love that they cut the details of what's going on with Antonia and Kylie because those parts just weren't very interesting, in my opinion. And then they just upped the supernatural element and the witch element and the spells and everything. And I loved that. Like the scene where Jillian shows up at like the PTA meeting where they're figuring out the phone tree and like she and Sally like doing the tricks on people, like stuff like that. Like that's what I want from a story like this. And so I loved that the movie had those moments and just really focused more on the supernatural and the witchy aspects. And then yeah, the casting is incredible. Like you can't go wrong with 1990s Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock. What an awesome duo. It's funny because I had seen this movie before. I watched it in like 2016 or 2017. And it was at a time when I was actually like feeling kind of down and I was wanting like just something to watch to distract me. And I remember I had been picking different movies and nothing was keeping my interest. But then I put this on and I had never seen it before and this kept my interest. And so it was like a real comfort movie at that time. And watching it this time around, there was a lot I had forgotten, but watching it this time around, I'm like, wow, like no wonder this stuck when I needed a comfort movie 8 years ago, because I can totally see that, like chick flicks in general are what are my go-to for comfort films for the most part. And this one just had everything you could want out of like a witchy chick flick. And I just really loved it. So yeah, in case you can't tell, when it comes to book versus movie, the movie wins for sure. I did enjoy the book and I do want to read more by Alice Hoffman because like I said, there were certain things about this book that I really liked and I thought it had a lot of potential. I think it just needed a few tweaks here and there and it would have been better. So there's like a prequel book all about Maria Owens. So I specifically want to read that one. But yeah, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Let me know if you have read this book and if you have read other books by Alice Hoffman, specifically the books in her Practical Magic series. Let me know how the other books are. Let me know how you feel about this movie. And speaking of witches, American Horror Story Delicate is returning or has returned by the time this video comes out. And that show deals with witches as well. And Delicate Condition is the book that show was based on. And that book was such an interesting insight into witchcraft and it made me see it in a way I had never looked at it before and how women gathered together and they created these different spells and potions and superstitions because the male doctors weren't helping the women enough. And specifically with like female body problems, male doctors just weren't helpful and they weren't doing much. And so the women took it upon themselves, especially back in the day, they couldn't actually be doctors. And so they kind of turned to forms of witchcraft and different, spells and things of that sort in order to help themselves because the male doctors weren't helping. And then also, speaking of witches, in the movie The Color Out of Space, the daughter is a witch. And also that scene specifically, something about it when I was watching it, like I'm not into witchcraft, but suddenly it clicked and I could see why a woman would be into it because, we all have that spiritual side of ourselves. And when you turn to religion, so many religions are patriarchal and it's run by men and men have a lot of the power. And so I can totally see why a female would turn to witchcraft as a way to have the power. Like you can cast the spells, you can make the potions, like you have the power and you have the control, And so I don't know, something about that really clicked for me when I watched it. And even though I myself am not going to like actively get into witchcraft or anything, I can just see the appeal, basically is what I'm saying. And I'm also loving just the witchy content in books and movies. And so if you have witchy recommendations, give them to me down below in the comments, whether it's movies or books. I don't want anything like too dark. Practical Magic is like a fun witchy story. Delicate Condition and The Color Out of Space maybe get more into the darker side of witchcraft to some extent. So I usually prefer the lighter side of witchcraft. But anyway, let me know down below in the comments what witchy recommendations you have. And so again, thank you so much for watching this video. And here is Ringo here to say goodbye and to also thank you for watching. And do not forget to give this a thumbs up. And again, comment all of your thoughts down below. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Since I mentioned The Color Out of Space, I will go ahead and link to that video here on the screen. I'm really happy with how that video turned out, and yet it didn't get as many views as I would have hoped. So I'm going to link to it here in hopes that it will help boost that video because, yeah, like I said, I was really happy with how it turned out. So anyway, give that video a watch and say hi to Ringo down below in the comments. And again, I just can't get over how cute and how sweet he is. Oh, he's such a sweetie. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.